Alright, so this will be our video 4 and last and final video for your AP European History. So we just finished talking about communication and transportation, so now we're moving on to roles of women, the influence of feminism. During the 20th century, daily life in Europe was focused on survival. Many women left their traditional roles as mothers and caretakers to work in munitions factories and other male-dominated fields. As Europeans moved beyond the conflicts and settled into the second half of the century, women began to have opportunities and choices as never before. Feminist movements emerged throughout Europe as women's advocates fought for their causes. Roles of women. Women on both sides of the conflict during World War II joined the armed services in large numbers. Hundreds of thousands of women served in auxiliary or support positions such as nurses, ambulance drivers, and office workers. They also played significant roles in resistance movements, which often took them into enemy territory. Women in Yugoslavia even fought alongside men on the front lines. In Russia, almost 800,000 women served in the armed forces, some as pilots and snipers. In Britain, more than 640,000 women served in the armed forces during World War II. At first, only single women, aged 20 to 30, were called to serve, but by mid-43, almost 90% of single women and 80% of married women were working in factories or directly with the armed forces, remember being like a total war. War also brought an increased demand for labor on the home front. Women made up much of the shortfall. The British workforce grew by 500,000 between 1939 and 1943, and women, many of whom had previously been unemployed, contributed 80% of that. This surge of women into the workforce happened during World War I as well, but women left the workforce as soon as men returned from war. After World War II, however, the change was more lasting. Unemployment in Britain was wiped out. In the Soviet Union, where women were already widely employed before World War II, more than half of the labor force was female by 1942. Child care facilities. Before the two world wars, there was little or no need for anyone outside the home to take care of children. Wealthy families hired live-in help. But as women increasingly left the home to go to work, the need for child care outside of homes grew. State-led expansion of early childhood care and education, or the ECCE, services first emerged in Russian Federation in the early 20th century to encourage women to participate equally in work and public life. In both Russia and Western Europe, such programs also served to provide an education at as young an age as possible. These programs eventually led to preschool programs and modern-day kindergarten. Efforts of feminists. World War I brought about women's suffrage, or the right to vote, through much of Europe. The recognition of the vital contribution women made to the war effort led to the widespread belief that women should be granted the right to vote. The battle was harder fought in some countries than others. France didn't allow women to vote until 1944, Italy in 1946, Belgium in 48, and Greece in 52. In neutral Switzerland, women didn't gain the right to vote until 1971. But beyond voting rights, women's status at home and in the workplace was little changed in the 20th century. Society after World War I was male-dominated. Women were still largely discriminated against in the labor market, especially married women. If paid employment was available, it was only in women's jobs, such as nursing, teaching, and secretarial work. In education, too, women continued to struggle. While more women began to study at universities between 1900 and 1940, the percentage was still small. In Spain and Greece, for example, only 7% of the university students were female. Second wave feminism. The first wave of feminism in the 19th and early 20th centuries focused mainly on public issues such as women's suffrage and legal rights. Building on these achievements, second wave feminism, or the women's movement, addressed more personal issues including family, sexuality, and professional ambition. It was largely a response to the post-war ideal of domesticated housewife and the inherent limitations that ideal placed upon women. Second wave feminism peaked in the 60s and 70s after it had successfully expanded choices for women, both inside their home and outside in the workplace. Which that happens the same thing in America. It's basically the same thing as women's liberation in the 60s and 70s and the push for like ERA and those kind of things. Simone de Beauvoir. French writer, philosopher, and feminist Simone de Beauvoir is best known for her 1949 book Le Deuxième Sexe, or The Second Sex. In it, she writes about the need to abolish what she called the myth of the eternal feminine. To her, this myth was the traditional view of women that limited their opportunities for intellectual development and for work opportunities. She also wrote about the need for women to be politically active, to engage in debate and advocate for equality. De Beauvoir advanced the concept that all individuals, regardless of gender, should be afforded the same opportunities. Her works became a staple of feminist literature. Alright. Population growth. In 1913, before World War I, almost 500 million people lived in Europe. By 1950, after World War II, this figure reached almost 600 million. However, the growth varied by country. The countries that suffered the highest losses in the war, such as Poland and Germany, grew more slowly. The Soviet population, for example, was 26 million smaller in 1946 than it had been in 1941, because they also lost 22 million people in the war. Changes in the birth rate had mixed impact on the size of population. The absence of men during war, combined with the death of so many men in battle, reduced birth rates during both major wars. Then, following each war, couples that had put off having children during the war began to have children again. Many countries had a baby boom, a sharp increase in the birth rate to some extent. This made up for the decline in birth rate during the wars. The short-term effects of the war occurred within a longer-term decline in birth rates. The spread of birth control and education about family planning reduced the size of families. To counter this trend, some states provided families with financial incentives to have more children. The Soviets began making such payments as early as 1936. The significant cause of population growth was a steep decline in death rates. In 1910, life expectancy at birth in Western Europe was around 55 years. 40 years later, people were most commonly living to be 65 or older. The fall in the mortality rate was largely the result of the greater emphasis on public hygiene and advance in medicine. Better treatment of sewage, improvements of housing, and campaigns to improve health and nutrition for pregnant women all contributed. So did improvements in drugs and healthcare. In particular, growing knowledge about neonatalism, or the care of infants, helped more children survive the dangerous months following birth. Okay, so we're getting close to wrapping this up. So since we're getting a lot closer to finishing this up, go ahead and give me your favorite topic we discussed this year for this final video from European history for your final bonus that you can get. So give me your favorite topic from European history through email, ryan.southall@zacharyschools.org. Okay, options for women. Many states throughout Europe created job opportunities for women. Initially, these jobs were in fields traditionally dominated by females. For example, right after World War II, Britain's newly created National Health Service was first employed women as nurses, midwives, and clerical staff. Opportunities soon emerged throughout Britain in fields such as banking, textiles, and light industries such as electronics. The overall proportion of women in the British workforce increased from 46 in 1955 to 51% in 1965. Still, jobs were typically segregated by gender, with work categorized as women's work, typically paying less money than other jobs. Many women also still faced the marriage bar, which prevented married women from entering the workforce. By the 1960s, attitudes towards women, both in employment and in general, started to shift noticeably. Employers began to allow married women to work for wages, at least part-time. Countries passed laws making it illegal to fire a woman if she became pregnant. Divorce laws became more lenient throughout Europe, and women's studies programs emerged in colleges and universities. Record numbers of women ran for and started winning political office. Women were becoming more integrated into the workforce, a trend that continued into the 21st century. The pill. In the 1950s, family planning advocate Margaret Sanger raised $150,000 to fund research for the birth control pill, a pill that a woman could use to take to prevent pregnancy. In 1960, the pill, as it became known, was approved for use in the United States. It was soon available throughout much of Europe. The pill provided women with much greater control over their fertility and helped families plan when to have children. However, it was controversial. The Roman Catholic Church and some other religious groups opposed the use of the pill. Scientific fertilization. Alternative methods of fertilization gave women a different type of freedom. The process of in vitro fertilization, or IVF, fertilizes the egg outside the woman's body and then implants the embryos. Women who wish to have children on their own are able to do so without a male partner, needing only a male donor. Couples who are unable to conceive children naturally also have IVF as an option. Okay. Women in politics. Thanks in large part to suffrage movements and the second wave feminism, women in the later half of the 20th century began to obtain political power. Throughout Europe, women attained political positions previously held only by men. So Margaret Thatcher of Great Britain. Margaret Thatcher was the leader of the Conservative Party and became the country's first female prime minister in 1979. Her stated goal was to break with what she considered to be the failed practices of the Labour Party. The term Thatcherism became synonymous with her economic policies, including cuts in public spending, including cuts in public spending and tax cuts for high-income earners. The term is still used to describe such policies. Another of Thatcher's goals was to make Britain more competitive in the global marketplace by reducing the number of trade unions and privatizing parts of the economy that were under government control. Her attempts to privatize such institutions as the National Health Service were not popular, though she was still elected to a third term. She ultimately resigned in 1990 amid conflicts within her own party over European integration. Mary Robinson of Ireland. Mary Robinson became the first female president of Ireland in 1990. As president, Robinson worked to convey to the rest of the world a more modern image of Ireland, and she did so by taking it on a more prominent role than had past presidents had. Robinson was strongly committed to human rights. She's the first head of state to visit Somalia after its civil war in 1992. 2 years later, she was the first to visit Rwanda after the period of genocide. Shortly before Robinson's term as president expired, she took up the post of United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, or the UNHCHR. In that role, she made human rights at both the national and regional levels priorities of her office. Edith Cresson of France. Edith Cresson was the first female premier of France, serving from May of 1991 to April 1992. Cresson worked to improve France's industrial competitiveness and to reduce social inequalities. She was replaced after just 1 year, however, because of rising unemployment and decline in support for her Socialist Party. In 1995, Cresson was appointed to serve as European Commissioner for Science, Research, and Education. She and the entire European Commission resigned in 1999 because of alleged fraud and corruption. All right, let's see here. New voices in society. Let's see how close I am. I might have to make one more break, I'm thinking, because this is still a good bit I got to cover. Yeah, sorry, unfortunately, I need to take one more break, so we'll... wait a minute. Yeah. So give me a second. Let me go ahead and make a fifth video, because I need to take a break anyway. And and really we will only have one more video. So one more video.